often basketball trainers and coaches will pick a move that an NBA player uses and attempt to break down that move in order to teach younger players how to make the same move. But if you think about what's going on with the original player, the NBA player making the move, and what's going on with the youth player trying to copy the move, they're completely different things. And so the expectations can't be the same. So in a game, an NBA player dribbles at another player, reads that defensive player, reads the situation, understands his skills in that situation, his advantages versus that defensive player. And with those different constraints, the individual constraints that the NBA player brings to it, his skill level, his speed, quickness, height, strength, shooting ability, etc., and the task constraints, the time, score, the defensive player, the formation of the defense, etc., these interact, and the offensive player, the NBA player, makes a move. So then a coach or a trainer sees that move on TV, sees it on YouTube, and they're going to break down that move so that their player can try to make the same move. Now, that player is learning in a piece-by-piece bit how to do something. And then when that player gets into a game, first, the task may be different. So I might learn, let's say a behind-the-back dribble. Okay, and so I saw a behind-the-back dribble. And I get into a game, and there's a defensive player in front of me, so I'm like, oh, great. Now I'm going to use a behind-the-back dribble. But there might be a player behind me, which is a different situation or a different task than was present when the NBA player did it in his game. So I'm coming down, and so I'm trying to use something that I've been taught and apply it to situations that may or may not be appropriate to use. So as I'm deciding I'm going to use this move, now I'm having to put together all these different pieces that I learned. So I learned how to do, this part first, and where I'm going to put my foot, where I'm going to put my hand, and how I'm going to put my shoulders, and where I'm going to fake, and where I'm going to look, and all these things I'm trying to put together at game speed based on the practice repetitions that I've done, competing against a cone, and then make that move at speed against a live defender in a situation that may or may not be similar to the one in which I learned because I learned against a cone, or against a line on the gym floor. And so this is often how we teach things. And in some respects is not necessarily bad. To use NBA players or college players or even more advanced high school players as examples of things that a player can do or things that a player can experiment trying to do. But when we try to get a child or a youth player or high school player to do something exactly like an NBA player did without the context or without the specific task constraints, I think we can run into problems. So rather than saying, okay, I want you to do it, the NBA player did 1, 2, 3, I want you to do 1, 2, 3, and you're trying to do it exactly in the same way, I think we need to use the NBA example more generally and say, all right, so he set up his move, he changed speeds, and then he made an explosive move to the basket. Now you try. What can you do to set up a move, change speeds, and then explode to the basket? And so rather than trying to do the exact same move, you're trying to use that example, show him something on film to use as an example, but then giving him the freedom to choose his own move to use, and then having the capacity to change that move based on the situation. So to use an example, when I was young, everybody wanted to do the Tim Hardaway through the legs crossover. And it was an awesome move, and I used to practice it all the time in my front yard by myself. Then when I got in games, I never used it. So the differences are Tim Hardaway versus his competition was fast and short, and he was powerful. Me, against my competition for most of my life, I tended to be on the taller side and the slower side. So again, what he could do against his competition was vastly different than where my advantages were against my own competition. All right, and so to try to emulate somebody who had different advantages, different strengths, different weaknesses was never going to be appropriate. So even though this was the move that I probably practiced more than any other move in my life, I almost never use it in a game. Instead, when I got in a game, I typically went around the back or I used a spin move. Now, when I coach players, I tend not to teach around the back moves and spin moves because I think they're so overused and used so inappropriately that I don't spend a lot of time on them because I don't want to encourage their use because I think they oftentimes can become a crutch for players. Now, I'm not saying they're bad moves. I'm not saying they shouldn't be used, but they're not things that I'm necessarily encouraging when I work with players. They're things that if the players figure them out for themselves, if the players do them naturally, I might show them how to do it a little bit better, but they're not things that I'm introducing to players, if you can discern the difference. So despite my, time spent practicing through the legs crossover, I almost never used it. And instead, I used, around the back moves or spin moves, which are moves that I almost never practiced. They became solutions to a problem. So if I was dribbling down the court and somebody darted for the ball to try to steal the ball from me, my natural reaction tended to be just to go around the back. And I used my size to protect the ball as opposed to using quickness, which is what somebody like a Tim Hardaway would use. If somebody darted at the ball, he'd be more likely to use a front crossover because he has that quickness, lower to the ground, more powerful. Me, I had to use kind of my length and my size against quicker defensive players. Similarly, as I attacked the basket, I often finished with a spin move because I could use, again, I was slower, so defensive players often caught up to me and cut me off. And so the spin move allowed me to use their momentum against them. So as they were working hard to get in front of me, I could get my body on them, spin away from them, and then use my length and my size to create an open shot. Now, if I was a smaller, quicker player, that may not have worked as effectively. I was playing a pickup game yesterday. Player tried to spin on me, didn't do a good job of getting his body on me. He was a lot shorter than me, and I was able to block the shot with no problem without getting anywhere close to a foul. So I would never say that the appropriate move is a spin move or the appropriate move is an around the back move. Instead, we want to give players tools to use, general tools, that is the basic change of direction, change of speed moves, and then have them practice against defensive players so that they can develop their own moves rather than trying to copy the moves or the style of another player, because the moves or style of another player may not fit with their size, strength, etc. I had a player that I worked with for a long time, and his dad used to bemoan that he didn't play like this other player. And I finally told him, I was like, look, he's never going to play like that player. They have different body types, they have different strengths, different weaknesses, and to try to be more like that player he might improve his weaknesses slightly, but he would lose a lot of his strengths as well. He's better to maximize his strengths, maximize his length, his speed in a straight line, as opposed to trying to be a real shifty, water bug type player, because he didn't have that same type of body type. He was a taller, longer, leaner player as opposed to a more compact, shorter, stockier type of player. So rather than trying to just copy moves off the internet and break them down into pieces to teach specific parts of specific moves, I think we just need to use these moves as general examples of what's possible, and then allow players to discover what move is going to work best for them in certain situations. Give them the basics in terms of basic ball handling moves, basic ball handling control, speed with the ball, and then give them time to play against defensive players, where defenders are bigger than them, stronger than them, faster than them, quicker than them, in front of them, behind them, on the side of them, and put them in all these different situations and allow the player to learn what moves are going to work for them in certain situations, what are going to work in other situations, and how they can best exploit their advantages during a game.